All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of Class Over Coffee. Today we're going to talk about building a draft of a persuasive research paper and specifically how to frame your paragraphs in a way that includes your evidence from all the research that you've done. So grab your coffee and let's get started. So when you use sources in research, there are some steps that you need to take to kind of get that information from the research into your paper in a cohesive way that helps support your argument. Obviously, you're finding the research and analyzing it. And now you're on step 3, which is the integration step, where you need to make sure that you're using that research to help build your argument and make your point really strong. So there are 3 ways, and I'm sure you've heard this before in other classes, but there are 3 ways that you can incorporate your evidence into your writing. The first way is a direct quote, and that's probably the most obvious. That is when you take the exact words from the source and you put it in your own text. You use quotation marks, you add a citation, so you're quoting that author's words directly. The second way is a summary. That's when you're kind of talking overall about a source. So this study explores the relationship between, genetically modified organisms and health and concluded X, right? You're kind of giving a broad overview of that source, but you are giving the results of the study, and that helps support your argument. So that's what a summary looks like. All 3 of these, by the way, do need to be cited in your paper. So even if you're not using the verbatim quote with quotation marks, you're still going to want to put an in-text citation and make sure it's in the references at the end of your paper. The third way is a paraphrase. This is when you take a specific piece of information from the source, but you restate it in your own words. So you might take the results of a study, for example, but you might tweak the way it's worded. You might say, instead of 90% of genetically modified foods are safe, for example, you might restate it and say nearly 100% have been found to have no impact on, or no negative impact on health. You see, you can just kind of reword it. You need to make sure you definitely reword it and you don't just change 1 or 2 words, but still have it mostly be the exact words from the source. You really have to kind of rethink it, get the information in there, but in your own way. So let's talk a little bit about quotations. These are like a helium balloon, okay? They add color to what you're talking about. So it's nice to hear from an expert. You come in, your readers are thinking, why should I believe what this person says? But when you bring in an expert, they're going to be much more likely to pay attention. So it adds some color, some interesting language. They need an explanation. Okay, and this is true for paraphrased source information too, somewhat, but really for quotes especially. It needs an explanation. Whenever you cite research, you need to put information in there to tie it into your argument. You can't just kind of lay out the quote and then move on, right? Some people sometimes fall into that. And it needs anchors. So this is what I mean by that. You can't just let it float away. You have to have something before it and something after it. So you're going to introduce the quote. You're going to follow up with an explanation of how it ties back into your argument. So here's an example. We're going to take a look at this. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to take a minute to read this paragraph here. So let's highlight each part of this paragraph so we know what it's doing. So in the beginning here in the white, you can see the introduction to this paragraph. That first sentence is the topic sentence. So you know that the rest of this paragraph is going to be an explanation of how Black musicians lost their individuality by attempting to appeal to white audiences. All right. So after that first sentence, there's a little bit more of an explanation of this. And then we get into the first anchor for the quote, which is in blue. It's an explanation of why this quote is coming. Instead of the clothes they wish to wear, they were told to wear similar fancy outfits. Some described them in a different way. And then we have our quote. So this is an introduction to the quote. As Beatle George Harrison said on first meeting the Supremes, and now we have the quote, we expected soulful hip girls. We couldn't believe that 3 Black girls from Detroit could be so square. And then we have our in-text citation. Now we need, and this is the part where sometimes students, they kind of leave the paragraph here, but we still need more. We need another anchor on the other side so that we can have this explanation as to why this quote is important. These outfits were deemed safe by the label because white people would generally find them nice. Anything less would play into the widely accepted stereotype that black people were unruly and beneath white people. So you can see that we have this last sentence to tie in this quote to back to that topic sentence. This is what you want to do for all of your body paragraphs, all of your sections of argument, whether it's one paragraph or two, or kind of spread out into two or three. Anytime you include evidence from your sources, you want to do it in this way. So think about the hot air balloon analogy, and remember that you need those anchors on either side. Here's some tips for you on doing this in a positive way. So showing your work. So you have all heard that in math class, right? You have to show your work. How did you get to the right answer? Well, the same is true when you're writing. Don't expect your quote, your evidence to do all the work. You have to, it's only a supporting cast member, but you have to make sure that you have included all that in supporting information around it so that it makes sense and that it does help strengthen your argument. Rely more on summary and paraphrase. So even though direct quotes are useful, they should be saved for really powerful pieces of information that you can't restate in your own words, and that really packs a punch. It's really impactful when it comes to your argument. If it's not that powerful or not that not like a wow statement, you can probably restate it in your own words and still cite it and still have it be evidence from a source that supports your argument without having to quote it directly. And you want to try to avoid quotes longer than 3 lines. If you do have to put in a quote that's longer, you're going to need to cite it and format it differently. So keep that in mind. In most cases, a quote that's longer than 3 lines, it might be that you want part of that quote, but you could leave out the rest, or you could maybe paraphrase part of it and then just quote a piece of the sentence. You don't need to directly quote a full sentence. It can just be a line or a few words, whatever makes the most sense. So think about that and really try not to quote anything that's longer than 3 lines. If you do have to include a block quote, which would be something more than 3 lines, you will have to double check how to format that. And I would recommend going to the Purdue Online Writing Lab for that. And you're also going to have to make sure you put in a lot of interpretation and analysis. You kind of have to earn it, right? If you really want your reader to look at this whole paragraph written by someone else, you really have to back it up with, this is why this is really crucial to my argument, and you have to read it. Here's an example of a quote with some different ways that you can introduce them. So here's one with an intro fragment. Martha Reeves, lead singer of Motown group Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, mentioned to a reporter, now we're starting our quote, "If I knew then what I know now, I'd have had my own lawyer and management firm." Okay, so now you need an anchor sentence of interpretation and analysis right after that. The inexperience and uncertainty of Motown's young musicians was consistently used against them for Motown's own gain. So now we're explaining what that quote is demonstrating. You can see also in that quote, the ellipsis, the 3 dots that appear after the word now. That is because there is a longer sentence there, but the author only wanted to quote the certain pieces of it that were the most impactful. So as I was saying before, you can cut down your quote and make sure that it's only really what really packs that punch that you're including. And you can do that by using an ellipsis like that. That indicates that there's more to the sentence that's not being included here. All right, so to review here, some tips for summary, paraphrase, and analysis. Be brief, give an example, follow it immediately with an interpretation or an evaluation. So as soon as you put in that quote or that paraphrase, follow it up with what that means or why it's important. Why should we care about what this person says or what this report or study says? So here we have some detail. The musicians were often too young to sign a contract themselves, putting the decision in the hands of their parents. Now we're going to throw in some context. This is the evidence. Stevie Wonder only earned $2.50 a week until he turned 21 because of his mother's signature. Now we're going to follow it up, again, that second anchor, with some analysis. This power that Motown possessed allowed them to be selfish with their earnings. So we're making an educated assumption here that because this was happening, that Motown was using this as like a form of power, right? All right, so this is what you want to do throughout the whole draft of your essay. You're going to start with an introduction. You use your attention grabbing information, introduce your topic kind of generally, and then you can start narrowing your focus. At the end of that introduction, you're going to put your thesis statement, which again should be like one sentence where you strongly state your claim. Try to leave out I statements. It's not your opinion. You're actually making a very bold statement here about a claim. This is true, this is not true because, and put in the arguments that you plan to explore throughout your paper. You're going to put in that thesis statement. So reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. Get them all into that sentence, and it should be, in almost every case, it's going to be the last sentence of your introduction. And then you're going to launch into these body paragraphs where you take each one of those reasons, those arguments you put in your thesis, and you explore them in more detail and throw in your evidence to support them. Don't forget about counter argument, where you put that is totally up to you. Sometimes people think counter argument is really, if it's a really strong counter argument, you might want to like hit it right away, and so you can kind of get it out of the way. Some people like to bury it in the middle, maybe in between two of their 3 reasons or arguments, because they feel like it'll have less emphasis that way. So you think about what makes sense for your topic and your writing, and put it wherever you feel like it feels natural. And then in your conclusion, you want to sort of summarize what you've said throughout the body of the paper, and really try to think of some sort of call to action that you can leave your reader with. What do you want them to do with this information? Do you want them to call a congressperson? Do you want them to donate to something? Do you want them to stop buying something? Do you want them to vote for something specific? Think about what is it that your readers, let's say now that you've convinced them and they believe you and they're on your side, what's the next step? So try to leave them with something like that. If you can't come up with any kind of call to action, you could always try to leave them with another question to think about, or something like that. All right, this is your first draft. Take your time with it. Don't worry about it being perfect. Really don't worry about grammar and mechanics and things like that. Really think more about your content, the meat of what you want to say, and worry much less about the other stuff. All right, we'll get to that later. Good luck, and please reach out if you need help.